Alright guys, so I'm going to try a couple things with my audio, trying to get you guys the best sound quality that I can. So I'm going to go ahead and try to use my headphones to see if this will get you guys a little bit better on the microphone. But here I'm going to walk you guys through the Vaca in the same way that I walked you through Columbus, because I want you to compare the two of them in a little bit. But before we do, I want you to understand how to read the Vaca's letters in the same way that you would a literary text, just like Columbus. So De Vaca's letters are really fascinating because they offer a very authentic, a very sincere view of life with these Native Americans. And it's a view that we don't get with Columbus. So De Vaca, as you know, he was sort of had to survive, and he did so by becoming a sort of master tradesman with the Indians. And when he did, he really gained the trust of several different tribes. And I want you to notice the way that he talks about the tribes compared to, say, Columbus. With the Vaca, we get a lot of detail, a lot of syntax diction, which is very emotive, very understanding. So, for example, he even starts his letter by saying, everyone talks about ambition. What may be gained by ambition, he brings about these inequalities of fortune and all these things. So he's basically saying, I'm not writing this for myself, because we know at this point that he too had been charged with crimes against Alcaraz, which I'll get to in a minute. But so if you'll notice, they're both in similar situations in terms of being arrested, but the tones are very different, and what they talk about are very different. So De Vaca, he focuses on these tribes. So if you'll look at page 45 right here, he talks about the humanity of these people. So he talks about how hard the women work. He says the women toil incessantly. And he says the people love their offspring more than any in the world. So he's really giving them these human qualities that Columbus completely dismisses. And we're seeing into their everyday life. So on 46 and 46, we're looking at their different practices. So their marriage practices, the death practices, how the community comes together when there is a death, and the mourning, the weeping, the wailing, all these different rituals. And it's not that De Vaca 100% accepts these. It's that he acknowledges that they are different than his own customs or what he's used to, but he still understands that they are important customs. So it's not that he's saying that he believes in them, but that he does understand them. And that's very, very different than Columbus. He also really humanizes their suffering here. So he says these people go without food for weeks at a time, for days at a time. He too has to suffer through this. So you really get the empathy of his experience with these Native Americans by understanding all of these different details that he talks about. So he talks about the hunger and the wailing and what happens when there's a death in the community. And he even talks about the languages and the lineages. It's really fascinating, all these amazing details that he gives us. And he says the Alcaraz always treated them well. I'm sorry, Alcaraz always treated them very, very well. So they were he says they were, very blessed, but he also understood that the trial that he was in was a trial of suffering, and he compares his journey on the bottom of 47. He also makes a biblical allusion and makes an allusion to Christ, but this is a very different appeal. It's not render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is his. He says on the very bottom of 47, his only solace is in thinking that Christ suffered even more in the blood that he shed for De Vaca. So this is not a journey of justice. This is really, you think about it, this man should be earning justice. This is a journey of suffering, of penance, of patience, all of which he seems to accept. Maybe not happily, but he does accept it. We get this sense of a trade and equality as well. So if you look at the top of 48, he talks about bartering with the Indians, combs and different things that he barters with them. As you saw, he is a master at this. This is how he survived. But it also creates a sense of equality, because if he's bartering with the Native Americans, that means they're going back and forth. It's not that he's coming in and saying, you owe me everything, or I am the Christian savior, or I am the European savior. He's creating a sense of equality with them. On the top of page 49, it's the same thing. He says that there are strange customs, like the fact that basically breastfeed until they're 12. He says this is a very strange custom, but I asked why they did it. So he's always asking why. He's trying to understand the reason behind it. And the reason behind it is that they often go without food for weeks at a time. So this is how the children are able to eat. So he accepts these practices even though they're very different from his own. And then on the bottom of 49 to 50, 51, I wanted you to note that there's a transition here. So the Vaca changes his tone. It's no longer telling the tale of the Native Americans. It's telling the tale of sort of the bad guy, if you will. And it's Alcaraz, Diego de Alcaraz. He is a very ominous figure because we know eventually that he was a slave hunter, and he would eventually come in and desecrate all these Native Americans that De Vaca loved. So he says that they came upon him, and when Alcaraz figured out that De Vaca had connections and the trust of these people, he told him to go to them and do things like command that they get food. And you notice that he says on 50, he says, it would be unnecessary to command them to bring food if they came at all, for the Indians were always diligent to bring us all they could. So he's saying, this man does not understand that you do not need to command these people, that they do it willingly because they have the trust, an equality in trust. So he notes that he has a division here, a division from Alcaraz and a division from Spain, essentially, and Christendom. So he says that he got in a hot argument with Alcaraz because they meant to make slaves of the Indians. And he has to convince the Indians to return to their huts, to trust that they need to return to their huts rather than trust this man. And he says that the trust, eventually, it's not hard to do because in the end, he says, the Indians replied that the Christians, meaning Alcaraz and his men, lied. We meaning De Vaca and his men, we had come from the sunrise, they from the sunset. We healed the sick, they killed. They killed the sound. We came naked and barefoot, they clothed, horsed, and lanced. So he's really comparing the two cultures and showing how to gain the trust of the Native American people. And it's a really interesting model, and given what we know happened, you feel as if they had just listened a little more to the Vaca, perhaps some of the bloodshed could have been spared. So these comparisons between the two sides are really interesting. And then, like I said, it's really interesting, especially that he does not call him the Spaniard, or even by his name. He says the Christian. So he's separating himself from the church and the state at this point, which is a huge move for a Catholic Spaniard at this time, being funded by the King of Spain. And he says, at the last part, he gives basically a warning. And he says, I told them we go rebuild their towns. He says, if they have not, I solemnly swear, if they have not done so, it is the fault of the Christians. So he's giving a warning. He's saying, if you come to find that these people have been massacred or murdered or been turned into slaves, it is the fault of these men, these Christians. That's very important that he calls them that. And sort of the ending of his letter is a tone of sorrow, and it's a tone of anger and frustration, not for himself, but for the state of these people that he's leaving behind, that he's being forced to leave behind, that he can no longer protect. So I just wanted you guys to kind of think about how to put De Vaca and Columbus in conversation with each other. Yes, both men are great explorers. Yes, both did wonderful things. Both did, I'm sure, bad things as well. But I want you to kind of think about how they compare in terms of the letters, the style, the structure, the man behind the letters, what's happening in the letters, all these different things. So I've given you instructions below on your blog assignment. All you have to do is click it, go answer the questions, use the text as evidence, so back it up with specific lines from the text, and make sure that your analysis is really thorough. If you have any questions at all, let me know. Otherwise, I really hope you guys enjoyed the Vaca.